why is it important for us to read the whole Bible?
That's a great question. Let me share. I actually did this today as I was thinking about tonight. And let me just walk you through a couple of ideas here. This, you can see this says the Old Testament, Jesus on every page. So the reason that everybody loves the New Testament is because it's about Jesus, and they love Jesus, and they love to hear all about him. And what they don't realize is that actually Jesus is on every page of the Old Testament. If you remember, after Jesus' resurrection, there were some disciples that were on their way from Jerusalem to Emmaus. They were walking on that road, and they were really discouraged. And they were talking to each other, and they met this stranger on the road. They didn't know who it was. It was actually Jesus. And they were talking to him about what they had experienced. And they said, we thought that Jesus was going to be the one that would redeem Israel. And of course, they're saying that based on everything that they knew about the Messiah from the Old Testament. And Jesus, of course, says to them, O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory? And then in verse 27 of Luke 24, he begins with Moses. That's the law, the first 5 books of the Bible. He begins with Moses, and then he goes through all the prophets, and he interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. This is the Old Testament, and this is the things concerning himself. So the first thing I want you to think about is, in all the scriptures, there are truths about Jesus. And that's what's so exciting about reading the Old Testament. You think about the law. The law reveals the character and ministry of Jesus. We have Jesus in the upper room, and he's there with his disciples before he dies. And he picks up this cup, and he says, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. And if you don't know what covenant is, and you don't know why blood is necessary, and you don't understand about the Passover sacrifice, and you don't know the sacrifices, and you don't understand why anybody has to die for sin, and the fact that sin brings death, if you don't know anything about that from the law, you won't appreciate what Jesus did on the cross for you.
Right.
That's right, yeah.
And not only that, the law reveals the character of Jesus. Every time you read a law in the Old Testament, a rule, some strange thing, it is telling you something about the character of Christ. So if I made a law for my kids and I said, Alex, you can't go into your sister's room without knocking first if the door is closed. That rule that I just gave him tells you something about me. I've just revealed to you something about my character. I've just revealed to you that I care about the privacy of my daughter. I care about protecting her. That's something about me. Every time you read a law in the Old Testament, it's telling you something about who Jesus is. When you realize that and you go back and you look at all the laws that there are, it's amazing the kind of character content that you realize that you can learn about Jesus. Then you've got the prophets. The prophets reveal the heart and mission of Jesus. So you've got Isaiah, and he's telling you about the suffering servant. And he's talking about how the Messiah was going to be despised and rejected by men. He was going to be a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And that was describing the ministry of Jesus. If you don't know that, if you haven't read Isaiah 53 and appreciated the fact that Jesus was going to bear our griefs and carry our sorrows, and he was going to be smitten by God and afflicted and pierced for our transgressions. If you don't understand that that's what he came to do and appreciate, then you won't catch the heart and the mission of Jesus when you read it in the Gospels. Then you come to the poetry and the wisdom sections. We're talking about Psalms and Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. This reveals to you the mind and the wisdom of Jesus. Proverbs and everything that has to say about how to work with people and understanding things, that's exactly the way Jesus thought. And that's what he knew about people. The Psalms, of course, we have the Messianic Psalms. They just beautifully reveal his mind, the things that he was thinking and going through, the emotions that he had. Then you get to the history. These are all the stories. And these aren't some distant past stories. These are our stories. These are our spiritual fathers, our spiritual grandfathers. These are our people, spiritually speaking. And the history, all of those stories reveals the grace and the truth of Jesus. They tell you how was Jesus interacting with real people in real situations, just like you and me. How did he deal with people? How did he give them opportunities to repent? I tell my kids, I say, look, guys, you're going to read a lot about judgment in the Old Testament. And every time you read about judgment, you need to see that that is a call to repent. Think about Jonah and Nineveh. He goes to Nineveh and he says, yet 40 days, and what's going to happen to you? You're going to be destroyed. That was a call to repent. So every time you read about judgment in the Old Testament, that's grace. Every time God gives people a chance to repent, that's grace. That's truth.
Right.
So this is why we've got to read our Old Testaments. The Old Testament is what the Bible that Jesus knew. It's the Bible that he quoted. When he's resisting Satan in his temptations, he's quoting Deuteronomy. If you don't understand Deuteronomy, you don't know those stories, and you won't appreciate what Jesus says later on. So you can't really know the person that you're in love with unless you know and read the Old Testament.